While Super Mario's Odyssey began back in 1985, the origins of the Italian plumber are actually rooted earlier in a certain sailor man. Back in 1981, Nintendo tasked Shigeru Miyamoto with creating a game around the popular American cartoon. Miyamoto obliged and designed a game that saw Popeye scaling ladders to rescue olive oil from the evil Brutus. When it transpired that Nintendo didn't actually have the rights to Popeye, Miyamoto had to think on the fly to create new characters for his game. Brutus became the iconic titular ape, Donkey Kong. Olive oil became a lady called Lady before being upgraded to Pauline, and well, Popeye became Nintendo's famous mascot, a squat mustachioed man called Jumpman? While Jumpman seemed like an apt, if perhaps a little too literal name for their new mascot, the name sadly didn't stick. But the mechanics certainly did, and it came to define the character, the franchise, and hell, even the whole genre. Jumpman eventually became Mario in 1982, when the name started appearing in promotional materials for Donkey Kong arcade cabinets, allegedly a tribute to the landlord of Nintendo of America's first HQ in Seattle. And the name was cemented even further in Donkey Kong Jr., which, interestingly, is the only instance where Mario is the villain in the game he appears in. Fast forward to 1983 and Mario became the star of his own game. Mario Bros was an incredibly simplistic action platformer by Nintendo's future standards, ostensibly playing out like a wave-based combat game, where Mario, or Luigi, were tasked with killing off critters by hitting the floor beneath them before kicking them off screen. It's safe to say the mechanic did not catch on, but 2 years later, Mario returned for one of the most defining moments in gaming history. Super Mario Bros. Released for the NES in 1985 and laid the foundations for everything that would come to define the franchise. At the time, the NES was largely populated with single-screen games, much like Mario Bros. But Super Mario Bros. Introduced a right-scrolling movement that matched the player as they moved through the level. It brought a real sense of adventure and forward progression, and coined the term side-scroller, which would become the benchmark for the genre for years to come. Coupled alongside this new side-scrolling dynamic was a clearly defined structure too. The game was mapped out across 8 worlds, each made up of 4 levels, for a total of 32 courses. The game eschewed the darker aesthetics and New York setting of Mario Bros., relocating the franchise to the brighter hues of the Mushroom Kingdom, and it introduced a new antagonist for our portly plumber, Bowser, or King Koopa. From a gameplay perspective, the game was designed to build upon the satisfaction that players got from jumping over obstacles in both Donkey Kong and Mario Bros., a gameplay mechanic that Super Mario Bros. Would literally run with. The controls were perfectly pitched, and with World 1-1, the player had the ideal playground with which to experiment in. And then there were the power-ups that have now become synonymous with the franchise. Firstly, there was the dubiously titled Magic Mushroom, which turned regular Mario into Super Mario and granted him the ability to take an extra hit. Then there was the Fire Flower, which gifted Mario the ability to throw fireballs. And lastly, there was the Starman ability, which sadly has nothing to do with Bowie and gave Mario a brief stint of invincibility. Super Mario Bros. Was a huge hit, selling well over 40 million units worldwide, and it's not hard to see why. With groundbreaking gameplay, an eye-catching aesthetic, and some of the most iconic music in all of video games, Super Mario Bros. Became an instant classic and kickstarted a beloved new franchise. A franchise that would get a sequel almost immediately. But wait, here's where things get a little confusing. Okay, so Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels was technically speaking the second installment in the franchise, as it was released for the Famicom Disk System in Japan in 1986 under the name Super Mario Bros. 2. Although, do not confuse it with the other Super Mario Bros. 2, which released across the world in 1988, and we will get to that in due time. Right, back to 1986. The Lost Levels is basically more of the original Super Mario Bros., only far more challenging. The core gameplay remained much the same from the previous installment, but the difficulty had been ramped up considerably for an extra challenging experience. It was a far larger game too, spanning 52 courses across 13 worlds, but good luck getting through all of those. Then there were a handful of new little treats for players too, most notably the introduction of a poisonous mushroom, which was the first power-up you encountered in the game and, well, killed you. And if that isn't a statement, I don't know what is. Okay, now for the other Super Mario Bros 2, which came out for the NES in 1988 and threw out nearly everything that players had come to associate with the franchise. For starters, you might think to jump on the head of the first enemy you encounter in order to kill them, right? Well, no. That's because Super Mario Bros 2 is a Mario game in disguise. This sequel was actually based on Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, or Dream Factory Heart Racing Panic, and neither of those are easy to say, which was a Japan-only release. It was adapted to fit into the Mario franchise, and well, that's why it feels so different to the rest of the series. You see, Super Mario Bros 2, or Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, was designed as a harvesting action game, which saw you stand atop enemies and items and root them out from the ground, which feels like the exact opposite of the classic gameplay that players saw in Super Mario Bros. This slightly off-kilter sensibility was reflected in the game's plot too, which took place in a dream world called Subcon and saw Mario sucked into a quest to defeat a regal frog called Wart. Yeah, it's weird. The game was still a lot of fun and gave you the opportunity to play as 4 different characters with varying abilities. There was Mario, who naturally had average abilities all round, Luigi, who could pump his little legs to get a little more airtime, Princess Toadstool, who could float in the air for a few seconds, and then Toad, who was just a bit rubbish really. Super Mario Bros 2 was a huge success in the States and was eventually reverse imported back to Japan, where it had to be renamed as Super Mario USA because Japan already had a Super Mario Bros 2. Okay, I promise you the confusion stops here. 1989's Super Mario Land saw the franchise go handheld for the first time, and the transition to the small screen, for the large part, was pretty smooth. Released as a launch title for Nintendo's fancy new Game Boy, Super Mario Land put the plumber in the palm of your hand, that sounds weird, and successfully adapted a lot of the classic Super Mario Bros. Gameplay to the smaller screen. It was a far shorter game than previous iterations, featuring just 4 worlds and 12 courses, but it introduced Princess Daisy into the franchise for the first time and gave Mario a handful of new power-ups and abilities. In place of the Fire Flower was the Super Ball Flower, which saw Mario throwing super balls that would bounce around the level. But even better than that were the vehicles, the Marine Pop and the Sky Pop, basically a submarine and a plane that pretty much turned the game into a shoot 'em up. Okay, so if Super Mario Bros 2 was the weird second album, Super Mario Bros 3 is the band back to the absolute peak of its powers. Released for the NES in 1990, this 4th console entry was a huge technical leap forward for the plucky NES. Super Mario Bros 3 introduced a whole load of new characters, power-ups and enemies into the franchise for the first time. Most notably the unique end-of-world bosses, the Koopalings, the explosive Bob-Ombs, and the tenacious Boo, all of which would become series mainstays. On the power-ups front, Mario Bros 3 went mad, introducing Raccoon Mario, Tanuki Mario, Frog Mario, Shoe Mario. Yeah, that last one was a bit weird. But chief among all the new stuff was a brand new world map that gave a far greater sense of scope and scale to the adventure, and allowed you to pick your own route through each world to the Koopalings castle at the end of each section. Super Mario Bros 3 was a fantastic evolution of the franchise, and was enormously popular to boot, selling well over 17 million copies for the NES, and even spawning its own Saturday morning cartoon as well.
Nasty time is over, Koopa! Get those Goombas back in that cage!
Not only did it have a huge impact on the Super Mario franchise, but its non-linear structure had a huge impact on gaming as a whole, giving gamers a greater sense of choice to move backwards and forwards through the levels at their own pace.